All right, Shabbosai, good morning. Let us begin. So begin by thanking our sponsors, to thank Sammy and Malka Esterson, our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Kislev. Dedicating all the Shir Midrashas in honor of their parents, Yitzchak Leib ben Aaron HaKohen, Sarah Rachel Bas Baruch Avram, and Hinda Bas Hanech Ephraim. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshamos will have an Aliyah and the family a Nechama. We also thank our Week of Learning sponsors, Danny and Gail Cutler, for dedicating the Shiurim this week in honor of and as a Zechus for Seth and Rachel Rotenberg, and with great appreciation for all of the Shiurim. We also dedicate our learning in the Zechus of Arafu Shalima for Ruchama Aviva Bas Sheinachana and for Rachel Yehudis Bas Tova Gittel. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, Kol Chola Yisrael will have a complete and enduring refuah. And Rabbi say, with that, let us begin. So another incredible daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Yud Tes 19. We are picking up Emir Hashem at the bottom of Yud Ches Amud Beis 18b. And we are picking up Amarli Rabina the Rav Ashi, which is, you'll see there's a period there. It's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, about 11 lines up from the bottom. We actually have some today. I've been talking about halacha l'mais every day. Today we're gonna Mirat Hashem, Beli Neder, do three very interesting pieces of halacha l'maisa. Two of them by Thomas Mashkin, another by the halachos of Seiruf by Tomo, which is actually also quite interesting, fascinating. So with that, let's begin. So remember again, we're still a little bit in the realm of Thomas Mashkin, although we're going to take a little bit of a detour on the detour. So the Gemara says as follows. So what's Rabashi? Rava said, Lo Rabbi Yossi Sarak Rabbi Akiva, Lo Rabbi Akiva Sarak Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi doesn't hold like Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva does not hold like Rabbi Yossi. So what's going on over here? Take a look at Rashi. Rashi says, Vaha Amarava, it's almost right across in Rashi. Vaha Amarava, lo Rabbi Yossi, de la Kaman Darish Kavacham Michusar Kippurim. So like Rabbi Akiva, Sheni Osa Shlishi B'chulin. Rabbi Akiva holds that Allah Chalamayse in Chulin, a Sheni could create a Shlishi. Sheni could create a Shlishi. So now Ravina is going to say that Rabbi Yossi does not hold of Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Yossi does not subscribe to the idea that a Sheni can make a Shlishi. And follow along in Rashi. Rabbi Akiva sarah like Rabbi Yossi. And Rabbi Akiva does not hold like Rabbi Yossi. What does Rabbi Yossi hold? B'may demaisi lekaman berevi'i bakodesh mikava chomer b'mechusar kippurim. Because what says we're going to see later on, that halacha l'maisa, Rabbi Akiva is going to hold. That Rabbi Akiva doesn't like Rabbi Yossi, because Rabbi Yossi holds later on that you could establish a level of revi'i bakodesh. That halacha l'maisa, again, when it comes to kodesh, remember again, we'll say we really pretty much have three categories of food items. We have chulin, then we have truma, and then we have kodesh. Right, so kodesh really refers to anything of a sacrificial nature. So as we're going to see, Rabbi Akiva holds that halacha l'maisa, kodesh can reach the level of revi'i. And again, he's going to learn that out of a Kal V'chomer, as we'll see in a little bit. Mechusar Kippurim, umilse de Rava Pershua Rav Ashi Rav Kana L'kamam B'soma Fekevon Disle Rabbi Yossi Mashkin Metamen Achirim Doraisa Lo Mashkach Raya Ella Mitami Didarish Ella Mi Yitma Didarish Yitma al Karchach Isle Sheni Osa Shlishi Bechulin Daha Bein Yitma the Ochlin Fight. So we'll see. Rashi is giving us coming attractions. Salach Lamai said Ravina says Rav Ashi does not hold. Rabbi Yossi doesn't hold like Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva does not hold like Rabbi Yossi. So we'll say, let's analyze. Amarle Rabbi Yossi Bishitas Rabbi Akiva Rabbo Amra Vele Lo Sfirle. Bro, we'll say as we're going to see, Rabbi Yossi, who in fact was a Talmud of Rabbi Akiva, did convey certain rulings in the name of his Rebbe, but he himself did not subscribe to the Shita of his Rebbe, as we will see. So let's analyze. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Ashi Rav Kahana, Bishlama Rabbi Yossi lo sarva like Rabbi Akiva. So I understand that Rabbi Yossi doesn't hold like Rabbi Akiva. How so? We'll say very interesting. This Anya. On Rabbi Yossi says, Minayin l'revi'i bakodesh shu pasol. Rav Ashi says, how do we know that Revi'i Bakodesh is Pasal? Remember again, Revi'i Bakodesh Pasal means what? That the lowest level of Tumah by Kodesh will be a Revi'i. Right? Remember again, Pasal Rabosai is, we know this already from the beginning of this sugya. Pasal is where Tumah bottoms out. Right? Once you go ahead and you hit Pasal, it means you can become Tameh, but you cannot convey Tumah. So how do I know that Kodesh bottoms out at a Revi'i Batumah? So Gemara says, it's a Kal V'chomer. What's the Kal V'chomer? Uma mechusar kippurim shemutar b'truma. Both say so. Mechusar kippurim. Remember, mechusar kippurim is an individual who has gone to the mikvah, even waited for to become tamei, gone to the mikvah, even waited his requisite amount of time, but is still missing certain karbanos that he has to bring. So that could come up. That could come up in a case ultimately again of a zav and others. Thank you. So the Gemara says, how do I know that a mechusar kippurim is mutter b'truma? So the Gemara says, I'm sorry, Vidinu. Uma mechosar kippurim shemutar b'truma. If a mechosar kippurim is permitted to go ahead and consume truma, pasal bakodesh. Yeah, pasal bakodesh. Yerabo say halacha lemaisa. He is not permitted to go ahead and partake of kodesh. Shlishi, then all the more so, a shlishi shepasal b'truma eino din shiyaser revi'i bakodesh. Then certainly something that is a shlishi by truma should it not have the ability to make something else a revi'i for kodesh purposes? V'lamanu shlishi bakodesh min haTorah urevi'i mikal v'chomer. And therefore, we'll say based on this, we see the ability of an item to become a shlishi bakodesh. That's learned midoraisa, and a revi'i ultimately again from a kal v'chomer. So shlishi min haTorah. Dichsir will say, how do I know about the concept of a shlishi bakodesh midoraisa? Dichsiv. V'habasar asher yiga, top of yotes. V'habasar asher yiga mikol bakol tamei lo yeachel. Because we'll say the pasuk says that literally the basar, the meat, which will touch anything tamei, shall not be consumed. Milo askinon dinaga b'sheni. Are we not dealing ultimately again with a piece of meat that touched a sheni? So we'll say that's how I learn out that ultimately again. That's how I learn out the concept of a shlishi min haTorah. So the Gemara is interesting enough assuming, we'll see why the Gemara is assuming this, but the Gemara is assuming the basar, which is sacrificial meat, asher yiga b'chol tamei, that's referring to basar, sacrificial meat that touched a sheni. And it's telling you that what? That the sacrificial meat is tamei, which tells you that by kodesh, a sheni can become a shlishi. So the Gemara says, Milo askinan dinaga b'sheni, fine, and therefore the meat becomes a shlishi. So if I see from the pasuk that a sheni could become, or I should say that kodesh could become a shlishi. Revi'i mikal v'chomer, and we'll say, how do I know that kodesh could become a revi'i? That's based on the kal v'chomer. What's the kal v'chomer? Kid da'amrinon. So we'll say that's the kal v'chomer we just mentioned over here. That's the kal v'chomer that says if mechusar kippurim is mutter b'truma, but yet pasal by kodesh, a shlishi, which is pasal by truma, certainly should go ahead and make a revi'i b'kodesh. That was the kal v'chomer. So therefore, I learn out the concept that kodesh could become a shlishi from the pasuk, and I learn out that kodesh could become a revi'i from the kal v'chomer. Rabbi Akiva, and if you would think that Rabbi Yossi holds like Rabbi Akiva, nisni nami revi'i b'truma v'chamishi b'kodesh. We'll say, interestingly enough, this is actually quite fascinating. Rabbi Akiva holds that halacha l'maisa. There's an additional level of tumah. Whereas Rabbi Yossi just said before that halacha l'maisa, truma bottoms out at a shlishi, and kodesh bottoms out at a revi'i. Remember again, because I learn out by kodesh, I learn out shlishi from the pasuk, revi'i from the kal v'chomer. And I will say, we know, what do we know by the halachos of tumah? The halachos of tumah is the more sacred an item is, the more sensitive it is to tumah. So I know that kodesh is going to have the most extensive tumah framework. So now what we just established is that kodesh bottoms out, you stop at a revi'i. Yet, interestingly enough, it's therefore the Gemara says it's clear that Rabbi Yossi does not hold like Rabbi Akiva, because Rabbi Yossi just got finished telling us that I learn out shlishi by kodesh from a pasuk and revi'i by kodesh from a kal v'chomer. Yet, what does Rabbi Akiva hold? This is fascinating. Rabbi Akiva holds that actually truma could go up until a revi'i and kodesh could go up until a chamishi, which is really quite dramatic. So the fact that Rabbi Yossi just taught us that shlishi by kodesh from a pasuk, revi'i b'kodesh from a kal v'chomer, clearly indicates that he does not hold like his Rabbi Akiva. El Rabbi Akiva lo savler Rabbi Yossi minai. Therefore, we'll say that's how I know that Rabbi Yossi doesn't hold like Rabbi Akiva. Good, easy enough. Rather, how do I know that Rabbi Akiva does not hold like Rabbi Yossi? El Rabbi Akiva lo savler Rabbi Yossi minai. Amrlei dilo lishtamit tana v'lisni revi'i b'truma v'chamishi b'kodesh. Because we'll say, then let the Tana not hold back, or let the Tana come forth and say, and let him teach us that there's a revi'i by truma and a chamishi by kodesh. V'neima Rabbi Akiva. And we can attribute the fact that the Tana could have just said, once the Tana is enumerating the various levels of Tumah, let the Tana go ahead and say that there's a concept of Revi b'Truma, Chamishi b'Kodesh, say that Shita aligns with Rabbi Akiva's Shita. V'anan, Ahachi Neko. So we'll say, and therefore again, we would have assumed that Rabbi Yossi does hold. The fact that the Tana doesn't indicate that to us, doesn't make this statement, tells us that Rabbi Akiva doesn't know like Rabbi Yossi. This is what we're supposed to rely on, or this is the totality of your proof that Rabbi Akiva does not hold like Rabbi Yossi. So Nafak Rav Ashi. So Itema Rav Kahana. So Rav Ashi went out, others say it was Rav Kahana went out. Dak v'ashkach. So they went out and they found the following Mishnah. Hadisnan. Both said this is actually quite fascinating. Hakli mitzarif esma shebesocho lekodesh avalo l'truma. So we'll say, let's talk about this in just a moment. So if you go down to the bottom of the page, Rashi, in the wide lines, it's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, about 12 lines up from the bottom. So Rashi says this is actually a fascinating case, which you're going to see in the Rambam as well. Hakli mitzarif masha besocho. So Rashi says areva aruka. So we'll say, imagine you have a large trough. A large trough. Areva could be a bowl or a trough. He says uba ochle kodesh mikan va'ochle kodesh mikan. So let's imagine the following scenario. It works better with a trough because it'd be hard to imagine such a large kli like this. Because you have a kli, so you have a large kli, right? Imagine just for a moment when I say large, like a long kli. So imagine a long rectangular kli. And what happens? You have kodesh food on one side and kodesh food on the other side. Ve'ein nogin zebazeh. And the food, of course, is not touching each other. So, right, a long, large rectangular kli with kodesh food on one side, kodesh food on the other side. V'naga tami ba'ochlin shebarosh echad ubekli lo naga. So we'll say, so what happens? Now let's say someone tamei comes along and touches the kodesh food on one end of the kli. He doesn't touch the kli. He just touches the food on one side that's in the kli. What's the halacha? Lo naga va'ochel in mitamikli. Now, and I remember again. Generally, we know in Hilchos Tumah, Ochel can't convey Tumah to a Kli. Pretty much the only thing that Ochel could convey Tumah to is what? From yesterday's Daf, we saw this. What could Ochel convey Tumah to? Mashkin. Right, Mashkin. Other Ochel also potentially Midrabanan, right? But Ochel could generally, remember, I will say the way it works, remember we saw this yesterday, Ochel to Mashkin, Mashkin to Ochel, but generally, at least not Midaraisa, Ochel can't go to Ochel, Mashkin can't go to Mashkin. Midrabanan, we'll see that again. So in any event, the Tamei person is touching the Ochel. He's not touching the Kli. So therefore, you're going to say, we know, in Ochel, the Gemara says, Ochel ein metame Kli. Now generally, again, I feel Midrabanan. Ochlin cannot convey Tumah to a Kli. That's true even Midrabanan, I will say, right? Which makes sense because remember, the notion of Ochel, Kli is on a higher level than Ochel. So you can't really convey Tumah to something, even Midrabanan, you don't convey Tumah to something that's quote unquote on a higher level. So therefore again, Vafilu Hachi, Ha'ochlin Shebeshnei Rasha Tamein Shakli Mitzafrin. So we'll say this is actually a very dramatic halacha. So Rav Ashi or Rav Kahana is coming along and finding this Mishnah that says a kli is mitzayv. So we'll say, just to illustrate the case again, you've got a long rectangular kli. There's kodesh food on each side of the kli. Someone tummy comes along and touches the food on one side, doesn't touch the kli, just touches the food on one side. What's the halacha? The food on the other side is tamei as well. Tamei as well. So all of the food is tamei. What's the pshat? We'll say the pshat is the Gemara says hakli mitzarfan. The kli brings everything together, right? The kli makes it, since they're both resting in one kli, so the kli makes it as if all of the food is one unit. So we'll say, again, just understand the mechanics here are very important. It's not the pshat that the food is conveying tumah to the kli, and the kli in turn is conveying tumah to the food. Why? Why is that not the mechanics? Because that can't happen. That's not the halacha. Ochlin, food, can't convey tumah ultimately again to a kli. So the kalim can convey tumah to ochlin, but again, that's not the case. Rather, there's the notion of a kli mitzarfan. The kli ultimately brings everything together. So the Gemara says a kli mitzarfis masha b'sochel lekodesh avalo l'truma. Ultimately, it will say, but however, this only works for kodesh, for sacrificial items. This will not work ultimately again for truma. So that's the notion of kli mitzarfan. So the Gemara says, "V'hav revi'i ba kodesh pasal." So the Gemara says, and revi'i by kodesh, will be puzzle. Vashlishi b'truma. I will say this Mishnah clearly indicates to us that what? That halacha l'maisa, truma bottoms out at a shlishi, and kodesh bottoms out at a revi'i. V'aravi'i b'kodesh puzzle, vashlishi b'truma. V'omer Rabbi Chia bar Abba, omer Rabbi Yochanan, me'edusal shal Rabbi Akiva, nishnas mishnah zu. And Rabbi Yochanan said, Rabbi Chia bar Abba said in Rabbi Yochanan, that halacha l'maisa, this Mishnah was really based on the testimony of Rabbi Akiva. This Sanya, because we learned, this is actually quite fascinating as well. Hosef Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva came along and he added on, Hasoles vakitores v'halavon avagicholim. So listen to this. You have kitores, or we'll say, well, you have solas, which is fine flour, kitores, incense, levona, frankincense, gicholim, coals. Shimnaga tvul yom b'miktasan, pasal is kulan. If a tvul yom touches any one part of any of these items, the entire entity becomes taminabo. So what does this mean? Take a look at Rashi again. Hosef Rabbi Akiva. Rashi is just pointing out, by the way, this is in Maseches Edius. Levona ugichalim. Now we'll say now the interesting part about these items being mentioned is what? They're not edible. You're dealing with non-edible items, yet we're talking about tumah. So listen to this. Levona ugichalim. Rashi says, Afal gav delav ochlin inhu. Even though these items are not edible, nevertheless, chibas hakodesh machsharton or mishavile ochel. So this is very dramatic. What does it mean, chibas hakodesh? That's what we're saying this entire sugya. The holier you are, the more sensitive to tumah you are. We'll say, by the way, it's not just a klal by inanimate objects; it's a klal by people as well. Sometimes we think that the holier we become, the more immune to a yetzer hara I should become. And yet, amazingly enough, we find it's often the opposite. That sometimes we work on ourselves and we grow, then we make a mistake, right? I suffer a setback, and I think to myself, like, how did I do that? I was on such a good path, such a good trajectory, and I had overcome. I thought, or at least I thought I'd overcome that particular yetzer hara, and now I fell prey to it again. I will say, because again, the holier something is, the more sensitive it is to tumah. The holier something is, the more susceptible it is to tumah. The holier something is, the easier it is to defile it. It's an incredible insight in life kedusha. So I'll say this is actually quite fascinating. So Rashi says over here that since these items are kodesh, since these items are all consecrated, used in the avoda of the Beis HaMikdash, therefore what? Therefore, halacha l'maisa, chibas kodesh machsharton. Ultimately, again, literally means the love of kodesh. What it means is because they're kodesh, therefore they become much more receptive to tumah. So we'll say what happens. So paslas kula, and Rashi says, now remember, so what did Rabbi Akiva say? Rabbi Akiva said, if you touched any one part of these items, you make the rest of it tameh. You make the rest of it tameh. Pasal es kulan. So Rashi says over here, Amma, so we'll say, so what do you see from here? In order, what is this another illustration of? This is just an illustration of what we just said before, of kli mitzarif. That obviously we're talking about a situation where these items are resting in a utensil, and once you touch one part of it, so we'll say, if you could imagine, you have a utensil filled with coals from the mizbeach, or with fine flour from the mizbeach. You touch one part of the fine flour, what happens? The rest of it becomes tameh. The rest of it becomes tameh. Kli machsharton. I'm reading the rest of Rashi. Paslas kulon. Am mitzarif kli masha b'socho. Di'im yishum denagi adadi gam b'gachel shnaga ba metami es chaverta. Aval chaverta sulo metamya. So we'll say, because remember again, don't think for a moment that the way this is operating is. You might think, imagine for a moment you have the coals, right? I have the coals of the mizbeach. So now, let's say the mizbeach hakitores. I have them now. I touch one of the coals. So you might think that the way it works is, well, you touch coal A, and coal A touches B, and B touches C, and C touches. That can't be the dynamic, the mechanics here. Why not? Why not? Because if I say, then you're establishing that what's the halacha? There could be a shvi'i or a shmini or an asiri b'tumah, and of course, no one subscribes to that idea. Rather, the idea that Rabbi Akiva is espousing is what we just said before, that kli mitzarfan. That's when you have items that reside in the same utensil, they become one unit, to the point that if someone tamei touches one of them or one piece of it, the rest of it becomes tamei. So remember again, that's true even when the two items are on opposite sides of the kli, all the more so when they're residing next to each other. Umeose eidos nishna mishnazu dakli mitzarif v'katani behedya revi'i bakodesh pasol Amud Rabbi Akiva Chamishi Leslay. So we'll say again, the point over here. So we'll say, so therefore there are two things that are coming out of here. Rabbi Akiva is the one who's teaching this Mishnah, right? So he's teaching them on the concept of Kli Mitzarif, that a utensil has the ability to combine items into one unit. But you also see Rabbi Akiva on record as only talking about what? Only talking about a Revi'i Bakodesh, no Chamishi. No Chamishi. So therefore I will say it clearly indicates to us that Rabbi Akiva holds that Truma bottoms out at the Shlishi, Kodesh bottoms out at the Revi'i, and there is no Chamishi Bakodesh, Revi'i in, Chamishi lo, Shlishi in, Revi'i lo. So you see Rabbi Akiva holds that Halacha L'maisa, Kodesh could become a Revi'i, not a Chamishi, and Truma could go ahead and become a Shlishi and not a Revi'i. Alma Kasavar. So I'll say, interestingly enough, the Gemara is fine. So we'll say, so therefore, that kind of closes out. Rabbi Yossi doesn't hold like Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva doesn't hold like Rabbi Yossi. But now we introduce this interesting concept of tziruf. The Gemara says, Alma kasavar tziruf d'Rabbanan. So we'll say, we see from here that the concept of tziruf, which means items residing or items situated in the same utensil, are combined into one unit. Tziruf d'Rabbanan. Upligid Rabbi Chanan, I will say this argues on Rabbi Chanan because he holds the Amar Tziruf de Oraisa. Wow. Rabbi Chanan holds that Halacha L'maisa. Halacha L'maisa Tziruf is Rashi. And I will say, look here Rashi for just a moment. Alma Kasav Tziruf de Rabbanan. Rashi says, Milsa ba'an pe nafshehi. Meidra Rabbi Yochanan me'idus Rabbi Akiva nishnes. Alma Kasav Rabbi Yochanan Tziruf de Kli L'kodesh. Diktani Gavi Malos Lav Doraisu. Ella midrabana me'idusa Rabbi Akiva to midrabananu. So we'll say ultimately again, remember, so now based on what we just said, Rabbi Akiva is one who was teaching us this concept of tziruf in Maseches Edyos, which just tells us that the concept of tziruf, the ability of a kli to take individual items and make them into one entity, is a din dirabanan. The gechalim ulavona lav b'nei kibuli tumaninu ella midrabanan. So we'll say, because remember again, first of all, remember how this halacha is being illustrated. It's being illustrated with inedible objects, inedible items. The notion of tum rabosai generally is regarding items that are fit for consumption. So the fact that we're going ahead and teaching these halachos of tziruf by lavona, by gicholim, indicates to us that this is a din dirabanan. This is a rabbinic law. The finish Rashi. Fine. So Gemara says, now comes along Rabbi Chanan. And Rabbi Chanan says, no, tziruf is not Rabbanon, tziruf is D'oraisa. It's a biblical concept that a kli has the ability to combine everything inside of it into one entity. Shneimar, this is great. Shneimar, kaf achos asara zahav melea kitores. Because I will say the pasuk says, right, by the Nesiim, kaf achos, one, literally again, one ladleful, asara zahav melea kitores. So listen to this, we'll say, listen to the drasha. Hakasav asa koma shebekaf achos. Great. Right, so let's say, so how many times have we heard that pasuk, right? And we think to ourselves, okay, interesting, there's a lot of repetition. What does it teach me? Rabbi Chanan says, teach you something very important. Kaf achos means everything inside of a ladle becomes achos, becomes one, which teaches us, we'll say, the concept of kli mitzarfon is d'oraisa, which is really quite dramatic. So the good news is everybody agrees that halacha l'maisa kli is able to go ahead and unite everything inside of it. But halacha l'maisa, the shaila is it a din d'Rabbanan, is it a din d'oraisa? Rabbi Akiva telling us it's a din d'Rabbanan, and Rav Chanan telling us that it is a din d'oraisa. Tanan hasam. So we'll say, I'll tell you that. Keep Akiva, I'm never going to do it. So I'll tell you the halacha l'maisa on this. So this is the Rambam. This is the Rambam in Hilchos Avos Hatuma, Perik Yud Beis Halacha Zayin, chapter 12, Halacha 7. Listen to this. Achar shenigmar akli mitzayif mashe besocho lekodesh avalo letruma. Interesting. So the Rambam paskins that Halacha l'maisa, we adopt the position, we adopt the concept of hakli mitzarfan, that a kli could unite things, but it only dafka works for kodesh, not for truma. Ketzah, see, since what's the case? Klishu male perus prudin zemizek. You go in simukin grogros. The nago tuma be'echam. So let's say you have a large utensil and there's fruit inside of it, right? Fruit inside of it, and the fruit, by the way, are independent entities, right? So dates or anything else. Nitma komashe bekli lekodesh avalo l'truma. So I'll say, so the way the Rambam paskins is that we paskin at kli mitzarfon, but the Rambam paskins it only applies ultimately again for kodesh and not for truma. He goes on, v'remez yesh l'mayla zumi Torah, says there's a remez to this in the Torah, Kaf achos asara zahav malea kitores. Amru chachamim koman shebekaf harehu kiguf echad. So we'll say it's clear from here that halacha l'maisa, the Rambam paskins like Rabbi Akiva. Namely, we subscribe to the concept of kli mitzarfan. A kli could unite the contents, but it is a din derabanan. It is not a din deraisa. It's a din derabanan. But the derabanan has a scriptural allusion in kaf achos. Good. Plus, I still owe you the Rambam on Tumas Mashkin, which we're still going to get to today. But let's finish the Gemara. So we'll say great case. Tanan Hassam. Whoever thought that Tum and Tara could be so much fun? It feels. Yeah. All right. Tanan Hassam. So let's go back. Tanan Hassam. Amachat shenin seis bebasar. Both listen to this case. You find a needle inside of meat. So we'll say the case over here is you shechted an animal. You open it up, and there's a needle. We'll say, so obviously, those of you who were with us, in the last cycle of Daf for Chulin, understand that finding a needle inside of the animal could pose certain kashrus issues as well. Which I'm at a case that there's no kashrus issues. But Lamais, again, you find the needle inside of the animal. So what's the halacha? We'll discuss the parameters of this. So the Gemara says, the knife and the hands of the Kohen are tahar, v'habasar tameh. But the meat itself is going to be tameh. Now, we'll say, look at Rashi for just a moment. Tanan Hasam, second line from the bottom. The edios. So we'll say there's another ruling in Mesechus edios. V'alamochat heyed imshar edios shimnin seis babasar kodesh. We're talking about, again, you're finding a needle in a sacrificial animal. Shasakin shenagaba. We'll say we're talking about a case where the knife had contact with the needle. So the knife that touched the needle, or vayadayim shekoin shenaguba, or the hands of the kohen which touched the needle, tohorin, artar, va'basar tameh. Okay, so you're shechting a sacrificial animal, you open it up, there's a needle there, the knife touched the needle, the kohen's hands touched the needle. What's the halacha? The knife is tar, the kohen's hands are tar, but the meat is tameh. What's going on over here? However, nim says beperish, but we'll say if you found the needle in the excrement of the animal. We'll say, so what does that mean? So what that means is, let's say when you're opening up the animal, remember again, there's certain excrement that wasn't excreted, it's still inside the body. You find the needle inside of that, because also remember again, as part of the haktaras evarim upidarim, they would clean out the intestines as well. So sometimes again, there was excrement that came out of the animal. If you went ahead and you found the needle in there, halacha l'maisa, that does not pose a problem for anything. Hakol tahar. Let's analyze. I'm Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva comes along and says, Zachinu, shein Thomas yadayim b'mikdash. We are lucky. Zachinu means, like we'll say, remember again, it means like the rabbis gave us a bonus, right? The Chazal bonus, that there's no Thomas yadayim, there's no ritual impurity of the hands in the Beis HaMikdash. Now, we'll say, now what does that mean? So Rashi, the word Zachinu is on Amud Aleph, but the Rashi has Amud Beis. Zachinu, Rashi says, top Rashi, test Amud Beis. Zachinu, Zuchus v'tova v'revach v'takane hilanu mehefsid kachim. Shalom higzira g'ziyas daim b'mikdash l'tamei b'davar shem etame adam. So we'll say, listen to this. Remember, there's a concept of Thomas Yadayim. The concept of Thomas Yadayim is we assume that what? Stam Yadayim are shniyas l'tumah. Right, that in general we assume that a person's hands, stam yadayim, are just tameh, right? And that's based on the idea of yadayim or skanios, that the hands are all over the place, right? People touch things that are unclean without even realizing it. But the rabbinic gezerah of Tumas Yadayim does not apply inside of the mikdash. So Rashi continues, he says, Shlo migzerah gezerah yadayim b'mikdash, li tameh b'davar shem etame adam. Dahai machat, mukmilei delav bar tamuye adamhu, dilu chutz lemikdash mitamim yadayim betuma kol du afilu staman b'shum yadayim. So I would say normally again, once Tumas Yadayim says two things. Number one, that stam yadayim askanios, that your hands are generally considered to be tamei. Right? That's why I will say again, a kohen would have to wash his hands before partaking of truma, because we assume that stam yadayim are going to be tamei. And number two, that yadayim have the ability to contract tuma midrabanan, even when the rest of the body does not. So interestingly enough, you could have a similar case like this of a tummy needle, which could potentially convey a lesser form of tumah to the hands, but not to the rest of the body. So Rabbi Akiva is just saying, Baruch Hashem, this din does not apply inside of the Beis HaMikdash. So you go ahead, you open up this sacrificial animal, you find the needle. For some reason, we're assuming the needle is tameh. We'll discuss the parameters of that. Outside of the Beis HaMikdash, it could be that contact with that needle would make the yadayim tameh. But Baruch Hashem in the Beis HaMikdash, that din does not apply. I v'nema shein tumas yadayim the kelim b'mikdash. But 1 second, it's not just the hands. Remember again, what did the Brisa say? The Brisa said that, or the Mishnah said that halacha l'maisa, neither the hands nor the knife become tamei. So Rabbi Akiva should say that Baruch Hashem, inside of the Beis Hamikdash, thank God, there's no tumas yadayim and there's no tumas kelim, because neither the hands of the Kohen nor the knife that he's using to cut the meat are tamei. Rabbi Yehuda Amarav, Vitim Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina, Yadayim kodem gezeras kelim nishnu. So this is very interesting. So interesting enough, so Rabbi Yehuda is the name of Rabbi Yossi or Chanina, that the gzera of Yadayim preceded the gzera of kelim. That's why apparently when Rabbi Akiva is talking, they had not, when Rabbi Akiva made a statement, they had not yet made the gzera on kelim. They only made the gzera ultimately on Yadayim. So let's look at Rashi for just a moment. First of all, Rashi is the name of Nami zachinu she'in tumas kelim b'mikdash midrabanan b'davar she'in tuam min Torah. So remember again, Rabbi Akiva should have also said, thank God there's no rabbinic tumah of kelim. That's why the knife remains tahar as well. Look at the next Rashi. Well, finish the Rashi. Dila b'chulin gazur rabbanan be'tumah afagav d'ma doraisa tar ki disnan gabe yudches davar va'ochlim va'kelim shnetu mashkin v'chi katani sakin tar. So remember, Rabbi Akiva says, Baruch Hashem, the rabbinic tumah of hands does not apply in the Beis Hamikdash. That's why even though the Kohen came in contact with the needle, his hands will remain tar. The Gemara says, well, you should have also said, thank God that the rabbinic tumah on kelim doesn't apply in the Beis Hamikdash either, because otherwise the knife would have been tamei, but the knife remains tar. To which the Gemara says, well, the truth is the gzera on hands, on yadayim, preceded the gzera on kelim, and Rabbi Akiva was talking apparently the gzera on kelim was not yet made. Look at Rashi. Yadayim kodim gzeras kelim nishnu v'yitamid rabbanon. So ultimately, again, the rabbinic tumah on yadayim preceded the rabbinic tumah on kelim, and therefore again the kishiidu eidos zu adayin lo nigzera gzeras chachamim al tumas kelim. When Rabbi Akiva made his statement, Chazal did not yet make their gzera on kelim. Lefichach lo yuchal lomar zachinu shein tumas kelim b'mikdash tahi shaita afilu ba'ami nami lo havi. So therefore again, when Rabbi Akiva makes his statement, there was no rabbinic concept of tumas kelim. So watch this. Amar Rava, really? V'hachar vayu babayam gazu, but that's not true. The rabbinic gezerah on yadayim, right, that hands could contract tumah, that gezerah was made the same day as the rabbinic gezerah that kelim could contract tumah. This not because we learned hasefer v'hayadayim v'atvul yom v'ochlim v'kelim shnitmu b'mashkin. So say again, you see in the Mishnah that it says all of these things were legislated on the same day. We'll say the sefer. Remember again, we've learned this before. That Allah, so we say that a scroll goes ahead and conveys tumah. A scroll conveys tumah. Ultimate, not uncalled for, right? So the scroll conveys tumah. We'll say, right. So remember again, what's the pshat? It's actually incredible. Brachas. What happens? Rabbi saying halacha l'maisa. They said that if you touch a scroll, you take out a sefer, you touch the parchment, your hands become tamei. Right? Why is that? Because remember again, the Gemara says brachas. What they used to do? Rashi points this out. They used to store truma next to a scroll. Right? And what was the logic? The scroll is Torah is kodesh, right? And ultimately again, truma is kodesh. So put kodesh with kodesh. What was the problem? Mice got into the Aron Kodesh, would go ahead and begin to nibble on the truma, and they would then also go ahead and nibble on the scroll. So therefore, Chazal said, what we're going to do is we're going to tell you that if you go ahead and you touch a scroll, your hands become tamei. We'll say, what does that do? What happens? And what happens if truma touches the scroll? Truma also becomes tamei, which we'll say no one wants truma to become tamei, even midrabanan, because it precludes you from consuming it. So these are all the gzeros that are made on the same day. But the point the Gemara is making over here is you see that Yadayim and Kelim were made on the same day, same gezerah on the same day. Ela Amar Rava, rather Rava says, Hanach l'tumas sakin, da'afilu b'chul. Therefore the question is back. Rabbi Akiva says, Baruch Hashem, that there's no tumas yadayim in the mikdash. So the Gemara says, well, why doesn't he say Baruch Hashem, there's no tumas yadayim and there's no tumas kelim? So he answered because tumas kelim wasn't enacted until later on. The Gemara says it's not true. Yadayim and kelim were legislated on the same day. So why doesn't Rabbi Akiva bring up Baruch Hashem, there's no tumas kelim in the mikdash, and therefore the knife remains tahar, even though it came in contact with the needle? To which the Gemara says, Amarava, Hanach l'tumas sakin. Because we'll say the truth is, the knife would have been tahar even in a case of chulin. Now, what does that mean? So we'll say, look at Rashi again. Rashi says, Hanach l'tuma sakin dafilu b'chulin shelo chashu lahafsidan lo shaycha buhacha tuma l'sakin. The high sakin dinaga b'may shitamu lo basar v'lo machat en yicholin l'tamo the ein ochlin v'lo kli sheno avatuma metamen kelim. Because we both say the truth is, the knife would have remained tar no matter what. Because we both say, think about this for just a moment, right? Food, basar, food, ochlin can't convey tuma to kelim, and kelim can't convey tuma to kelim. So the truth is, the knife, it's true that whereas the Mishnah said the knife remains tar, but the truth is, the knife would have remained tar no matter what, because there's no way really for the knife to become tameh. It can't become tameh ultimately again through the basar, nor could it become tameh ultimately again through the actual kli. So Rashi goes on, he says, we'll say the only time, by the way, another kli could potentially go ahead and be metameh Kalim is if the first kli, if the tamei kli was an av, which we'll discuss in a little bit greater depth as well. Therefore, I will say, therefore, the reason Rabbi Akiva never brings up Baruch Hashem, there's no tumah on kalim, is because really the knife had absolutely no way to become tamei to begin with. So I'll say, so let's analyze this. Because after all, right? What is the knife coming in contact with? If you want to say that the knife came in contact with the meat, we're just talking this out now. So remember again, so ochel, food, cannot convey tumah to a kli. So maybe the knife came in contact with the needle. I will say a needle can convey tumah to a knife. Why not? Because a kli can't convey tumah to a kli. So therefore, I will say, here's what we have. Let's pause here for just a moment. What we have here is as follows. We're talking, Rabbi Akiva brings up a case in the Mishnah Maseches Edios that says you're shechting a sacrificial animal. You open it up and there's a needle there. The kohen touched the needle, the knife touched the needle. So what does the Mishnah say? The sacrificial meat is tameh, but the kohen's hands as well as the knife are both going to be tahor. Rabbi Akiva says, Baruch Hashem, that in the Beis Hamikdash they did not legislate tumas yadayim. Says that's why the kohen's hands remain tar. Why doesn't Rabbi Akiva also say that what? That Allah they didn't legislate tumas kelim. That's why the knife also remains tahar. To which the Gemara first answer was what? When Rabbi Akiva was speaking, they didn't yet what? Legislate tumas kelim. To which the Gemara says, not true, because again, all these things were legislated at the same time. To which the Gemara says, you're right. Rabbi Akiva doesn't bring up the tumah of the knife, because they both say the truth is, the knife was never going to be tameh. Because even outside of the Beis Hamikdash, in the case of kulin, the knife would not have been tameh. Why not? Because how would the knife possibly have become tameh? Because it came in contact with meat that was tameh, ochlin can't convey tumah to kalim. Because it came in contact with a needle that was tameh, kalim can't convey tumah to kalim. So both say, so what's interesting is, as much as the Mishnah said that the hands of the kohen and the knife are both tahar, the only novelty is about the kohen's hands. The fact that the knife is tahar, say that's obvious. That's obvious. So I'll say, hold cup in this case, right? This is a case we could dig our teeth into. So the Gemara says, let's talk about this, right? So remember, all the tumah in this case is being generated from the needle. So what's the pshat with this needle? So this is very interesting. What is it that we are supposed to do with this needle? Inema safek machat. So if you want to say that it's a needle that had a safek exposure to tumah, if that's what we're talking about, Rashi says over here, maya vidite dimitame basar. Why is it exactly that this needle is conveying tumah to the meat? So Rashi says safek machat v'lo yadinan itame itar v'shami haisa. So say, if you want to say that the needle that we're talking about over here is safek tumah, I don't know, maybe it was tameh, maybe it wasn't tameh, I'm not even sure who it belongs to. So the Gemara says, that's what we're talking about. The ha'itma Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Chanina, chad amar, lo gazru al safek harokin shibushalayim. So we'll say, one opinion said, let's say you find saliva. You stumble upon some saliva in Yerushalayim. So we'll say, what's the status of saliva? We'll say, now remember again, everything depends on who it comes from. So remember again, saliva, let's say from a zav, conveys tumah. So let's say you find saliva in Yerushalayim. Now we'll say, obviously the case has to be, you came in contact with saliva in Yerushalayim. So the shaila just is, what's your status? So lo gazu safek harokim Yerushalayim. So we'll say, first opinion says, when it comes to safek saliva in Yerushalayim, you're tar. The chad amar lo gazu safek hakelim Yerushalayim. The other opinion said, that when it comes to utensils which have a suffix tuma, we're not goes in Yerushalayim. Amar Yehuda Amarav kigon sha'avdalom. So both say. So therefore, again, at least according to the second opinion, suffix kelim in Yerushalayim is not a problem. So what's the pshat with this needle that you're finding in the sacrificial animal? If it's suffix tuma should not cause any problem in Yerushalayim at all. To which the Gemara says, no, what's the case? Amar Yehuda Amarav kigon sha'avdalom macha tamei meis v'kira babasra. Oh, we'll say, what's the case? The case is where I had, let's call it the coin. The coin had a needle. That was Tamei Tumas Meis. Tamei Tumas Meis. And I will say, remember again, what happens with a needle that is exposed to someone who has Tamei Tumas Meis? We'll say, remember again, we come back to now our first day in this Sugi Rabbi Chanina Skan Kohanim. Normally again, there is no lateral transference of Tumah. Normally, every single time you transfer Tumah, what happens? It goes down a level with one exception. What's the one exception? Metal and Tumas Meis. Right? Metal and Tumas Meis, when you expose metal to Tumas Meis, it takes on the same exact level of Tumah as the item it was exposed to. So look at Rashi over here. Rashi says, Machat shal tamei meis shu'av hatuma v'machat atzmo av hatuma decherev haru kechalal. We'll say, what's the case? The case is where you had a needle that was touched by someone who is Tamei Tumas Meis. Remember again, we'll say, Ruvain touches the corpse is Avi Avos HaTumah. What does Ruvain become? Ruvain becomes an Av HaTumah. Remember again, by a corpse, there's one additional level of Tumah. The corpse itself is Avi Avos. Someone who touches the corpse is an Av. Now, let's say Ruvain touched the needle. The halacha is now the needle is also an Av. Lateral transference of Tumah. So the case is where Ruvain the Kohen had a needle that was Tamei Tumas Meis, he lost it. Now, what do you know? He shechs the sacrificial animal, he opens it up, and what does he see? I've been looking for that needle. I've been looking for that needle this whole time. Amazing enough, he finds things in the darndest places, and he goes and he finds the needle that is Tumas Meis inside of the sacrificial animal. And ultimately, again, now I will say, could he be definitively sure that halacha l'maisa again? It's no, but it looks pretty much like the needle. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Avin, Amar kigon shaisa para chasuma uba michut shayim. So the other possibility is that halacha l'maisa. What happens? The possibility is we're dealing with an animal that was muzzled since it came into Yerushalayim, which means it did not ingest anything in Yerushalayim. Which also means what? That when it ingested the needle, where did it ingest the needle from? Outside of Yerushalayim. We only say suffik kelim tahorin in Yerushalayim. But if the animal was muzzled in Yerushalayim and therefore by definition ingested something outside of Yerushalayim, we will not say suffik kelim tahorim. Pretty incredible. We'll say, look at Rashi. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Avin, Amar, Li'olam suffik machat kugon shaisa para chasuma basa michutz Yerushalayim. So we'll say, therefore two possible answers. Answer one is that no, the Kohen found his needle that was Tamei Tumas Meis, and again, it was mamish and avatoma. Or second possibility is, it's still a case of suffik, but it's not a case of suffik kelim Yerushalayim, but rather it's a suffik kelim michutz Yerushalayim. And we'll say, how do you deal with suffik kelim michutz Yerushalayim? L'chumra. And therefore, again, that's why the needle is tamei. So we'll say, let's analyze a bit more. Another minute. So the Gemara says, Gufa, this is really quite fascinating. So Gufa, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina, Chad Amar lo gazu al suffik harokim shubishalayim. The Chad Amar lo gazu al suffik hakilim b'shalayim. So we'll say, it's quite what we said before. Wait a machlokes. One opinion said that Chazal were not gozer on suffix saliva. So if you find saliva in Yerushalayim, you do not have to assume that saliva came from someone who is tamei. You could assume that the saliva came from someone who's tar, and therefore the saliva doesn't pose a problem. The other opinion said, no, saliva is a problem. You know what's not a problem? Suffix kelim. Suffix kelim in Yerushalayim. So I'll say, if you have a kli, you're not sure if it's tamei, if it's not tamei, in Yerushalayim, ultimately, again, you could be mekel. So the Gemara says, Rokin tanina, kelim tanina. The truth is, we learned both about saliva and about kelim. This is fascinating. We learned about saliva, rokia tanina, disnan kala, rokin and some Yerushalayim tahor. Both say in general, when you find saliva in Yerushalayim, it is tahor. Chutz mishal shuk ha'elyon. Rabbi say with one exception. The one exception, of course, is saliva that you find in the upper marketplace. Then Rabbi say, what's the pshat of that? Rashi says, shal shoka elyon, sham hayum iskabtzin tamei and shal litamas chanerim. So listen to this. It's fascinating. Rabbi say, fascinating. Can you imagine in Yerushalayim of yesteryear? They had two Machane Yehudas, right? There was the Machane Yehuda for Amcha, for regular people, but then the Timein, Dafka used to go ahead and kind of congregate in a separate marketplace so as not to go ahead and expose everyone else to their Tumah. So when we say Safek Rokim Yerushalayim is Tameh, Zumizi is Tahar, that's the general marketplace. But if you find saliva, ultimately says the Gemara, the Shuka Elyon, then Halacha Lamais, again, that's Safek Rokin Tameyan. Schutz Mishal Shuk Elyon, so the Gemara says, Lo Tzricha Afagav Dis Chazik Zav. So we'll say the novelty would be in the following case. So it goes without saying that if you were to go ahead and find saliva in the upper Shuk, you would assume that that's Tameh, because that's where the Tameh people usually congregated. The novelty over here is that Halacha Lamaisa, if, let's say in the lower marketplace, you know that there was a Zav who was there, right? Reuven the Zav, you saw him just walking through that area, and then after he goes through that area, you go ahead and you find saliva. Even though again, I'll say, I know for sure that a Zav passed through this area, nevertheless, Halacha Lamaisa, in the lower marketplace or in the regular marketplace, we still assume that Safek Rokin is going to be Lakula, Safek Rokin is going to be Tar. So we'll have to stop over here. We'll pick up in Miras Hashem with the case of Kalim, really riveting Gemara. We'll say tomorrow, it's incredible to think, but tomorrow is our last daf in Rabbi Chanina's Skana Kohanim. Good, excellent, very good. All right, so I'll say Miras Hashem, that'll be our last daf in this sugya, and Miras Hashem, we will continue Miras Hashem going forward. Shkach,